Hello, and welcome to the SaWGuy podcast.
Like scary movies. What's your favorite scary movie?
Here's Johnny.
We'll tear your soul apart.
The boogeyman is real, and you found him.
Game over, man. Game over.
What do you want?
I want to hear you scream. From the front time, bitch.
Welcome to the SaWGuy podcast. As always on the SaWGuy, joining me over here for another episode. Today, I'm going to give it away. I know I gave it away in the first episode, but I'm kind of excited for this one. I really am. This one we're going to talk about Stephen King. So, real quick, before I note that this is all going to be on Stephen King horror films. Nothing that he's going to do with TV or his books or anything like that. Just because Stephen King has done so much shit, I won't be able to cover all of it in one episode. So this one's going to be strictly about his movies, alright? So, right off the bat, Stephen King. When you think of Stephen King, what do you think of? The creator, the innovator of horror. And that's what he basically is. And he's still fucking innovating horror, you know? I mean, you look at it right now. They did the remake of It, you know? What was the one that recently came out of like the cowboy shooting thing one? The Dark Tower, I think it was. I don't follow anything that's really not horror. So if I fuck up, let me know in the comments. I'm probably sure it is the Dark Tower, I think. But when you think of all the other films, because I grew up in the 80s, I know right off the bat for sure Carrie, even though it was made in the 70s, but all of us have seen fucking Carrie. There's also Christine. He's also done Creepshow, Cujo. Yeah, they sound the same. Creepshow, Cujo. Misery, The Mist. That turned into a TV show. Mangler, Maximum Overdrive, which is another fucking classic. Silver Bullet. Oh my god, Silver Bullet was one of my other fucking favorite ones. And then you got Children of the Corn. Secret Window was another good one I liked. Sleepwalkers was another fucking crazy one. I'm a cat person, so yeah, I gotta fucking like, Sleepwalkers. But he's done a lot of good goddamn films, if you think about it. If you do an actual list, because I went through Google when I was doing this for my notes, and he did a lot of horror that people don't really look back and say, oh yeah, that was a Stephen King flick. Oh yeah, that was a Stephen King movie, But he's done a lot of good ones, and what's funny is that he's done so much, but all of his ideas have all been original. I consider him as the innovator of horror. More so than I think with Carpenter, obviously way better than Dean Koontz and all these other people that have come out that have contributed to horror. And the reason being is because Stephen King was the first one to actually do it. Now, I won't go in too much in depth of everything else as far, like I said, with his TV shows, but we all know his TV shows, Rose Red, all those other ones, and those are good. But I'm going to save that for another episode. That way you have something to chew on with this one, right? So without further ado, let's keep continuing on. So, if I missed anything, let me know. But basically, what I wanted to point out with Stephen King is that he is the true pioneer of horror. Without Stephen King, you wouldn't have horror movies what it is today. You wouldn't have horror stories like it is today. And it's like what I was saying in the first episode of Supernatural. Supernatural is all about the unknown. And Stephen King was the master of the unknown. So when you think about stories that he's did, such as, obviously, The Shining, like I said, The Shining was just so out there with his story. And I know the one that I'm talking about is the Stanley Kubrick. I know Stanley Kubrick kind of altered it a little bit for the movies. We all know about that. But even if you watch the TV-made series that he did, the 2-part miniseries, it still was a little out there. Same thing with other films that he's done, like Maximum Overdrive. Salem's Lot was another good one. Then you think of Children of the Corn, like, whoa, what the fuck? I mean, when I think of Stephen King, I know I'm going to keep repeating myself on that, but when I think of Stephen King, honestly, I can't not picture any of those movies without associating with Stephen King, like, being up here. Like, I really can't. Because he really, if you think about it, Carrie was the first one to come out. I think it was in 72 or 74. So it came out like way before all these slashers and the icons and everyone came. And horror at that time was just kind of floating on by. It was something that always had to do with the supernatural and everything. But, he's done a lot. He really has. And when I look at it, he's always been the pioneer of it. And what are you, and I know everyone's going to say, SaWGuy, what are you talking about, pioneer? Well, I'm going to tell you like this. SaWGuy's going to teach you something. If you think about it, the 70s he had hit movies. The 80s he had hit movies. The 90s he had hit movies. I mean, fucking now he still has hit movies, They're all, granted they're all remakes, but he's still, making good shit out there, And when he's not doing movies, he's doing fucking TV shows. He's still writing books. He's doing, new Netflix movies. Gerald's Game, that's, whew, man. He's done some good shit. But on my notes, what I wrote is that basically he's done so much that everybody takes a little bit of Stephen King into their work, I guess you could say. And you could see it, because Stephen King, all of his stories, whether you read them or you watch them, but since this is a horror podcast and mostly about movies, we're going to go with the horror movies, right? All of his horror movies that he's ever done has all been build up. It builds up, builds up, builds up. Then you see what it is at the end. You're like, whoa, what the fuck? Like if you look at, not The Mangler, but another crazy one that I like was Graveyard Shift. Graveyard Shift had, it was one of those cheesy films, it was the 80s or whatever. But it was cheesy, but it kept thinking like, what the hell, So the story goes in that this guy, they work on a cotton ranch or a textile ranch, and they do all this hard work. The boss doesn't like him. He treats him like shit, all that stuff. And then you start finding out that people are getting killed little by little, and you don't know what it is. And then you find out it's this fucking rat crossed with a bat thing. And what I also remembered about the film is that you had Brad Dourif, the guy who voiced Chucky, in it. And like that just made that film that much better. Just having well-known actors in his movies, I think, from the 70s and 80s really kind of built up his reputation. And that's another thing I want to touch on, is that Stephen King films have brought out all these different actors when you look at it. I know a lot of people are like, well, what the hell are you talking about? Well, I don't know if you all know or follow certain actors, but there are certain ones that really got their foot in the door because of horror movies that Stephen King wrote. Case in point, let me give you an example. Carrie, you had John Travolta, he started in that. You have PJ Souls from Halloween. You have William Catt, granted he only did House and a bunch of other shit that he did, But, that's one example right off there, What I also wrote too on my notes is that, let's see, Silver Bullet. You had Corey Haim in there before he got really big. Gary Busey. And what other ones did he did? Children of the Corn, for sure, he had Linda Hamilton. Like, I can go through this list, and I can tell you right off the bat, like, all these actors, they all got their starts from his films. And a lot of the films all had to do with the unknown, the supernatural. He had some creature ones, the Night Flyer and stuff like that, but those they weren't as entertaining, they weren't as memorable. I think his most memorable work has to be, right off the bat, his Big Five. Obviously you got the 90s with It. The 80s, you're going to have Cujo, Creepshow. And to a certain point, you could say The Shining, the Jack Nicholson version. I mean, he didn't do the movie, but he wrote the story. And then in the 70s, of course, you had Carrie. That was his first one that he started. But later on, he went through that transition that, even though his stories were so random, and they were like hit after hit after hit after hit, he was still getting movie deals for these. And it's crazy. Because I would have never thought he would make all these movies off of, like, the one and done kind of stories. When you think about it, like Misery, that was another good one. It was a one and done. Silver Bullet, for sure. Sleepwalkers. Now, I still haven't talked about Sleepwalkers. Sleepwalkers, I think, was always my favorite because I would see that fucking movie all the time. Because back in the day, when you had regular cable TV, they would play random movies on the weekend. Sleepwalkers was always that one that came on. And I like Sleepwalkers, besides me being a weirdo cat person. But I like Sleepwalkers because of the fact it was two creatures. They were down to their last two. And it had some weird fucked up shit, like the mom and the son would fuck around to recharge or whatever, But they were like creatures, and they were afraid of fucking cats. Go figure, right? But I always remember that movie because there's a scene where the sheriff, he goes and tries to save one of the girls and stuff in the film, and the main lady that's in it, I don't know if you would call it protagonist or whatever, but she basically came after the cop. She fucking stabbed the cop with a corn on the cob because of that fucking movie. Because of that fucking movie, I couldn't eat corn. You know, I don't know what it was. It was a mental thing. I was like, okay, I associate corn with stabbing people in the back. I don't know. It was fucking weird, you know. When you see that film when you're a kid, it makes you think different shit. And yeah, you know. But other ones that I remember, and Silver Bullet was one of the ones I always fucking remember because that was another film they would always fucking play a lot. Now, that was a good one for a couple of reasons. Because, yeah, it was a werewolf movie, but it was a fucking different werewolf movie. You had a priest playing, spoiler alert. I know I should have fucking said that first if you haven't seen it. But the priest, he plays a werewolf, which is played by the actor from The People Under the Stairs, that weird, creepy looking style guy. And, you know, honestly, I don't know the actor's name off the top of my head, but he's always played those weird out there roles and shit, and he just runs with it. He played the priest, and it's not like a normal priest. He was a fucking creep in the movie, and it made you like fucking hate him. Like, what the hell? There's a scene in the movie where Corey Haim, he's, you know, a handicapped kid. He can't get around. So what Gary Busey did is built up his wheelchair and put like a motor on it. So they called it the Silver Bullet, you know, hence the name. But anyways, he had a moment where he shoots fireworks or whatever. It's 4th of July weekend. He gets it in the werewolf's eye. Then he finds out it's the priest. And the priest, you know, comes after him with the fucked up eye. And the kid's stuck and he can't fucking get out. And then just the fact of how he comes up so creepy, undressing and shit, like he was going to turn into the werewolf. And then all of a sudden somebody comes out and saves him. It was just creepy, you know. And then for the effects that they did, the story that they did, the fact that it involved the werewolf being a priest, somebody who's supposed to be like a safe person, come after you, come after kids. There was another scene that really fucked me up. Was he was having a dream, and then all of a sudden he was, you know, giving a sermon or whatever in the church. Then everybody all turns into werewolves, starts fucking killing each other and shit. And yeah, I tell you what, that was a damn good film. It really, his films really get to you, you know, when you start thinking about it. But there's a lot of good memories with it, you know. Personally, I like Stephen King's films. I've always fucking go crazy anything that's Stephen King's, because you know right off the bat it's always going to be good. Now, it's not a knock to Carpenter or any of those other guys, don't get me wrong. They're all good in their own ways, right? You know, Carpenter, he gave us Halloween, he gave us Michael Myers, you know, he's done some other things with They Live. And then Dean Koontz, you know, is Dean Koontz, you know, he writes horror stories that kind of follow that same thing. He's basically, you know, he's second the best. Well, not second the best. He's second, kind of like always on the coattails of Stephen King. You know, that's the way I see it. Don't get me wrong. I'm not bashing. It's just more or less like Stephen King's up here. Everybody else is just, you know, a little, you know. But the thing that I've always adored and liked about Stephen King, all this shit was original, and it all came from his mind. And that was the good thing about Stephen King, was when he was doing all the stories. I've read some articles about how he's written The Shining, when he basically got the idea when he was at the Overlook Hotel, the real one that was in Oregon, I think it was, and then he got the idea for it and all that. There was other ideas that he had too, but personally, those are like the top dog ones. And then another one that I can't, you know, forego on mentioning is Pet Sematary. Everybody knows Pet Sematary. It's better to be dead. And with Pet Sematary, that was another weird one. And then, you know, with all of his movies that he's done, he's always had some kind of cameo role where he does this, he does that, or he's the guy in the corner, you know. But Pet Sematary, what I liked about that one, that was another little different one. He played off the same Indian burial thing, kind of like what The Shining was. Okay, you know, he borrowed his old ideas, but he did it in a different method where if you bury the dead, they will come back. They won't come back as normal, but they will come back. And, you know, it's kind of so surreal like all of his other stuff, and then the fact that in the original Pet Sematary, when the little kid dies, the father, he goes and he buries him, brings him back, and the kid is not normal. You know, he's more, I wouldn't say zombie, but he's more kind of like evil, possessed, you know. And then, of course, you had Herman Munster in there. And basically, that whole movie would have been avoided if Herman Munster would have shut the fuck up, but he didn't. But then again, you wouldn't have the story of Pet Sematary. So Pet Sematary was a really good one. If you haven't seen that one, that's for sure number one. Well, I wouldn't say number one. It's definitely in the top 3, top 5 of Stephen King films that you have to watch if you do a Stephen King marathon. But Sleepwalkers is up there too. And I haven't even got to It. Holy shit, It. So, with It, I remember when that came out, that was obviously a miniseries, because the movie's like fucking 4 or 5 hours long. Probably exaggerating on that, but it's a really long-ass movie. But it was really good for what they did, and then the fact that they got a damn good cast, you know. You got the dude who played John Boy off of the Waltons. You got John Ritter. Obviously, you got Tim Curry. The great Tim Curry, who could fucking play millions of roles and do it just fucking phenomenal, you know what I mean? But the whole story was different from the book when they had to do the TV movie. And the reason why is because, you know, it was back in 1990, 1989. They didn't show much of it, you know? And actually, I think that was the first movie that they aired on TV that actually showed blood. And the blood scene that everyone was all up in arms about was the part where Bill, he's looking through the pictures, and then he sees a picture of Georgie. Then he sees it wink, he drops it, and then it flips up, and then all the blood and shit comes out. That was the first time I think you actually saw blood in a TV-made movie. So that was, he really pushed the envelope for a lot of stuff. You know, I can't, I'm not gonna, well, it just came to my head right now. Would I put him up there as Hitchcock? Kind of. I put them neck and neck. You know, Hitchcock obviously gave the macabre. He gave us all that good shit. Stephen King, he's up there because he built the stories. He built horror to what it is with supernatural and the crazy shit. And, you know, who would have ever thought that they could make a movie about a dog with rabies and that the dog would go fucking crazy, right? I mean, that's fucking genius, right? He does all that shit. And with Stephen King, I would say, yeah, he was big in the 70s, you know, with Carrie. But later on, I think he really grew in the 80s. You know, that was the main time frame with horror movies. Because horror movies, they got so fucking huge in the 80s. And without the 80s, you wouldn't have horror films either. But, case in point, with Stephen King, basically what this whole podcast episode is about is, one, he's the main fucking guy who contributed to all horror with his stories. Two, basically he opened the door for everybody else. Well, I wouldn't say he opened the door, he helped contribute to build that door. Because if you think about it, a lot of these actors, they all got their break just from Stephen King. And they got the break because they would be in his movies. You know, I didn't even talk about The Dead Zone, how not Anthony Michael Hall, that was on the TV show version. It was Christopher Walken, he was in that one, in The Dead Zone. I almost forgot about that one too. See, he's gotten so much that I can't fit all this shit in 30-minute show, you know what I mean? But bottom line, he really did open the doors for everybody. And with Stephen King, he's getting up there in age, so he's not doing as much movies, and a lot of his shit's getting remade. So if you're a horror fan and you really love horror movies, but you don't know what your taste is, you know, you can't go wrong with Stephen King. You really can't. Me, I like a lot of gore films, but I grew up in that era where there wasn't that much blood or gore. You know, it was hard to come by. You know what I mean? It really was. But if you think about it, with Stephen King, if he continued on doing other adventurous ideas, per se, where would horror be at? You know what I mean? Like, for horror movies, they wouldn't be where they're at today without him, for sure. For damn sure they wouldn't be there. I mean, of course, you still have movies like Halloween. You still have They Live. But they wouldn't be out there as much. You know what I mean? Stephen King made it cool to be out there. He made it cool to be like, you know what? I'm going to do this and do it my way. You know, like The Mangler. the Mangler had a fucking crazy mangling machine and shit chasing after people. And, you know, only Stephen King could come up with that. You can't see anybody else coming up with those ideas, because those ideas would have been like, what the fuck you talking about? You know, this Mangler thing comes to life and comes after you, you know. But if you really think about it, you know, Stephen King, he really was the true pioneer that brought 80s horror out to what it is. And a lot of people are still using his ideas, or they're still using clips of his movies, you know. You can, obviously, you know, what I see all the time, if you watch Family Guy, The Simpsons, all these Halloween specials of TV shows, they all play a rib or a joke off of Stephen King flicks. You know, you got Family Guy with Misery and all the other shit that he's done. You got The Simpsons, you know, joking around on the Treehouse of Horrors with The Shining. So if you think about it, Stephen King, he really was, actually, and still is, the pioneer. Now, that's just in horror, you know? That's not talking about what he's done for TV, what he's done for other shit that he's been out there to do. You know, honestly, what tripped me out was I was reading up more about the stuff of what he's done outside of horror, and he's actually done The Running Man. That was the old 80s movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger. And if you read the story's a little different from the movie for obvious reasons. You know, they got to put fucking action, Hollywood, and all that shit in there. But when you think about it, that he's actually so good, he can venture out into other genres and fucking make them good. Which is actually pretty cool, you know? And if you think about it, his stories, whether they were books or movies, they paved the way not just for movies, but they also paved the way for other people like R.L. Stine. Wink, wink. So, if you think about it, and I'm going to keep saying that all the fucking time, I keep repeating myself, god damn it, but if you honestly look at it, he paved the way for it and made it cool to actually like horror films, you know? He didn't make it so that way it was just one specific people, one specific crowd of people can only fucking like it and this and that, because you got your fucking segregations and shit here and there, you know, with people liking horror movies, people liking comedies, people liking this. But he would blend in all that shit a little bit, you know? I mean, perfect example was Stand By Me. Stand By Me, right off the bat, that one was a little different. It involved kids and their stories and growing up in, I think it was the 60s or the 50s, late 50s, early 60s. But he tied in a little bit of all that genre that he was known to do. And he, like I said, he made it cool to like horror movies, horror stories, horror films, everything about horror, you know? And that was the true pioneer of it. It's crazy to think, like, okay, God forbid if anything happened, but if anything did happen to him, that'd be one of the bad or worst loss in the horror community if something happened to Stephen King, because he really did open the doors, not just for actors, not just for other authors, not just for everybody in general. I mean, you think about it, horror wouldn't be what it is today, and we wouldn't be all crazy into this. I wouldn't be possibly doing this podcast right now. So, but yeah, that's a little bit of food for thought right there. But I did give out a wink for the next episode just in case. I won't repeat it again. But anyways, you know, if you think, like, my thoughts ending this podcast is Stephen King, I like his films. I love his stories. Yeah, they gotta water him down for movies and shit like that. And yeah, some of them are controversial, like with It. But, you know, if you, at the end of the day, he provides damn good entertainment for the horror community. And that's what it's all about. It really is. Without him, you would still have movies, but they wouldn't be as detailed. They wouldn't be as out there. They wouldn't be as creepy, you know, looking behind your shoulder kind of thing. You know what I mean? But with Stephen King, that's just his movies. You know, I can go on and on all day about his books and stuff. Personally, do I like the books versus the movies? Some I do, some I don't. Do I like some of his remakes that he's done, that he's affiliated with but didn't do all the work? Yeah, okay, I like those. It was not too bad, you know. There's other ones in the pipeline they're talking about doing right now, like Pet Sematary. They turned Mist into the TV show. Children of the Corn, they remade and done fucking 15 different sequels. Cujo, you can't get away with remaking that shit right now, but maybe. Sleepwalkers will be another good one. Silver Bullet would be another good one that they make, if they ever do a remake. But, I mean, it's got to be in the right hands of somebody who appreciates horror and his work and everything with that. Otherwise, you're just going to fuck it up. You know, like how I fuck up trying to get ready for this podcast some days. But it happens, right? It happens. But anyways, on that note, y'all, thank you for tuning in on this episode of the SaWGuy podcast. Next episode, like I said, I gave it away. I hope you're all fans of Goosebump books, possibly. So, if you're not familiar with Goosebumps, you'll find out on the next episode. But keep tuning in. Click to subscribe, like, follow my page on Twitter, leave a comment, leave a note. If you like this episode, let me know. If you didn't like this episode, tell me. I can only get this better with your guys' input as well. So, like I said, I'm probably going to have to do a second episode on Stephen King just on his horror stories alone. But on that note, you know, if you've never seen a Stephen King film, you're in for a damn good treat, honestly. But if you have, go back and watch some of the other ones whenever you get free time. Because all those movies, if you sit back and watch them and actually really intake everything, his vision of what he was coming through with things, you'll appreciate it a little bit more. And I learned that, not the hard way, but watching all that shit when I see it on Netflix, or you see it on Hulu, or you see it on TV. There's been some damn good ones that he doesn't really get a lot of credit for. He's usually a backseat kind of guy, which is kind of cool, you know. He's not all about the glory or whatever, but what's pretty cool about that is just he's very humble. I've never met him in person. I know he's kind of keeps to himself. He doesn't go to horror conventions a lot, but, you know, if he ever did, man, there'd be a fucking riot of people trying to meet him, you know. But if you think about it, at the end of the day, Stephen King pioneered horror. I'm doing this podcast episode to salute you because, you know, we wouldn't have horror what it is today. I know he probably may or may not be watching this, but, you know, you guys are all watching this. Y'all know how damn good he is. So, thanks again for tuning in, guys. Hope to catch you next time for the third episode of the SaWGuy podcast.